Hi, good afternoon. I hope everybody's having a good time so far. So, actually, it gives me great honor to be here with Melati, Donna, and Xavier. Of course, we're talking about body and performativity, and one of the things that we wanted to address is the perspective that each of them come from, like in terms of training and discipline, and how they all started out first. So maybe if someone can start out, me, Donna, on the side.
Hello. So I live in Berlin, and I studied painting, and come from a music background. Played drums for many years, so I always felt like collaboration was a big part of my work. And of course now it's combining painting and performance. So,
Hi everybody. Hello. Thank you very much for getting me here. Actually, I used to live half-half. No, I used to live full-time 20 years and more in Germany and studied there. I studied with Anto Furukawa and Marina Abramovic for many years. And then I went back to Indonesia. I work now mostly in Solo, in Jawa, and created most of the time actually performance art, besides dance pieces also the last several years. I did some choreography works and also photography.
Hello. I went to undergrad in sculpture and also got my MFA in sculpture, but always incorporated the body and movement and performance into that. So my work is also very collaborative, directing dancers and actors and different types of performers.
So I know it's kind of interesting because on this side, before Antony comes around, we have kind of like people who work collaboratively with regards to the body itself. And some of you, like Melati, actually has a long trajectory of progressing through using performance as a lens of looking at the body. And I was just wondering if you could talk about what you mean by collaborations, or how do you deal with the body within such collaborations itself?
It took me like maybe more than 4 years to prepare my first piece and dare myself to enter the stage. Because actually, when I was a child, I used to perform or to dance traditional dance on the stage, and my parents are dancers and so on. So, but through my performance art studies, then I left, the imagination of that the space is the stage is the space. So to work with dancers and on the stage, that I need to approach a different way, to collaborate with other bodies. I call myself, I borrow other bodies and I need to to know how to bring my idea and my concept and how the bodily experience can be transferred. So it's not merely making a movement and creating a kind of form of somehow a dance and mixed with performance art, but for me it's important how they experience the process also. Yeah.
And Donna, we also spoke about at some point how you follow through a long process with the dancers and your collaborators. Could you elaborate on that as well?
Well, the collaborators I work with are usually really good friends of mine, and we share a lot of intimacy, and we've been working for years. So essentially what I'm doing is setting up a series of potentials during the installations, and then they become sort of free to move and improvise within them, because they're usually durational from 3 to 8 hours a piece. The performances are really surprising to me as much as they are to the audience. So we have a lot of trust involved in it, and so a lot of what my job is to really set up a safe situation for these experiences to happen. but it's really incredible to see it unfold in front of my eyes as much as it is for the audience.
Xavier, you're also working on a project at the Empty Gallery that opened recently, and we also talked about at some point about the film and the figuration that happens in it. Can you?
For me, the figuration and the use of the body in film is more of a dissociative, kind of the artifact of the human body now, how uncomfortable it is to exist in this physical form when we're so used to being able to seamlessly filter it or represent it the way that we have more control. And so something about coming back to your physical form is like there's a horror to it or a grotesqueness to seeing yourself in the mirror when you're used to seeing the digital version of yourself that you have control over.
And Melati, you also moved from performance itself into installation. What was this trajectory of moving through the body itself? Basically, when we talk about your early works like butter dance and...
Well, please don't forget the butter dance was created when I was still a student. It was like 18 years ago. And within the 18 years, I also developed my work in a gradually in a in a different, not the different directions necessarily, but different way to understand also how the world go with me together, and becoming older body, and my body is becoming wider also. So also, but there is like this the skill of being. With my body is not going away. So there is another quality of presence. I think in the performance art it's very important, like to be aware of how your body's presence is, how you maintain the presence of your body, how you want to deliver the presence of the body itself to the audience or in the space and in the same time. So I think some of my work is related with the space, which is a kind of installation, and my interest was to, if my body is not there during the performance, live performance, how would be what would be left? So I kind of always thinking like the object. The object I was using is absorbing the energy itself. So it needs a kind of long process, like to understand what my relationship with the object itself, and how to place the object, what kind of energy when the space is empty, it's not just how do you say, a relic or something, but it's like a kind of an installation that is created through a process. So the energy is still there, is very important for me.
That was the word that you used yesterday when we were talking, was like kind of very interesting. It was the word essence itself.
Essence.
Yeah, as part of the installation. And I was just wondering, because Donna, you also spoke about intersectionality in part of your practice, but this had to do with gender and moving beyond that. So in consideration of this kind of intersectionality and essence itself, could you explain a bit more about that?
I'm really interested in presenting like the feminine form in all of its spectrum, and I think it's important not to just stick to like the binary idea of what a feminine form means. So a lot of the works are including people who are like completely changing over time, and so the works are documenting this transformation. So it's really like this intimate kind of documentation that's happening, and it's really not necessarily evident for the audience unless they're very paying attention and recognizing the models over several installations. But for us, it's building a lot of trust, and I think that adds a lot to like the essence of the work, like because the performances are very still and very uncomfortable, I think, for the audience, because it's not really for them. It's not like a really theatrical choreography for the audience. It's more like a, presenting like live textures that are disintegrating and forming during the hours that the models are presented. So the drama and the theater are more presented within the paintings and the textures on the body. And what I'm interested in is also like temporality and the ephemeral, like the fact that like the models will wash everything off at the end of the day, and they're also like having this kind of hallucinatory experience, being in this different skin and going through this experience in front of everyone. So it kind of creates this like really authentic, you know, moment for themselves and for me and our relationship, and the audience just gets to witness that from the outside.
This is a very interesting contrast because, like, you know, between Melati and Donna, there is this sense of essentializing, you know, the sense of the body. And on the other hand, Xavier here was kind of interested in the disassociation, the condition of disassociating with the body itself. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a bit. Like, what's your interest and how do you think about it as their everyday, you know, contemporary condition?
I guess I touched on it earlier of the being used to our digital lives and filters and everything, and then coming back to your humanity and just like trying to place who you are, what am I, you know, of what are my emotions when everything is so driven and constantly manipulated. And so I think there is a constant dissociation just existing and seeing like advertisements constantly and media and interacting within that with your identities online and whatever, Instagram. And
But how does that come across in your practice? Like, would you consider that?
I guess in the videos, like Abduct, I'm not sure exactly.
How would you like think about that or manifest it within?
I think that the sense of watching them, there is I think, identify with the dissociation of feeling emotions and how your physicality betrays you. And that's like, I guess the feeling that I want people to feel when they're watching the works is this reminder of that dissociation from your humanity.
But that's also like the essence of the body.
Yeah,
itself.
definitely. I relate to what you're talking about with the essence of trying to understand what is left, or what is real, what is authentic in our experience and our being in this physical form.
Yeah, in a way, also like we choose to use a body as like the main medium is also like an attitude that or a decision that with this there is a world that we want to say. It's not merely expressing, you know, like the physicality. You know, and I think that makes it different than the daily life also, probably, because otherwise there is like no difference between using body like in the daily situations, and then you but maybe in some conceptual work, some conceptual performance work can do like that, like the body moves like the daily life, but how daily is your body, you know, like how you move your body like in the daily life on a stage, for example. You know, like what is the border? Is it like being seen or not being seen, or being watched or not being watched?
I think that's really interesting because that's where we all unite, where, you know, there's like a performance going on online for the audience, which is what Xavier was saying a bit, and then there's like a very personal, interpersonal experience with living within the shell all the time. But there's, I think within what I'm doing is also like identifying that disassociation by putting people in a situation for hours where they're kind of discarding like what they think they are and how they look. So that kind of gives them freedom to behave how they want, but not dramatically, but like still, like being still is so like defiant as well and powerful and really difficult, which I think it's hard when you're mental state, you know, you're going through a lot, but you choose to be still. I think that's important. Yeah. How do you see stillness in your work? Like,
and also, I think, Melati, there was a discussion between when we spoke about what you believe as a relic and what you believe as an installation as well. So how does stillness actually incorporate into both of them?
The stillness is very important in my work. It's like because there is never be a total stillness. There is never, like, even, you know, like everything is freeze, like frozen, and it's not a stillness. There is like something going on. As long as you're dealing with the life body, of course something is happening inside. So of course something is inside. The world inside the body is speaking, and I think that is in my work. I think it's one of the training that I'm achieving through meditation, actually, the meditation practice to understand the inner, and how to bring the inner into the daily life, and then how to bring the inner world into a work. So this kind of particular thing, probably each of us have different kind of approaches, and but actually, probably that is always like the thing, you know, that how to express our work. Like the body is not just like representative of something, you know.
Xavier, you also have a very different training as well when it comes to the body. We spoke about the physical structure because of your training in Pilates itself, and I was just wondering if you could talk about your understanding through that lens, or did it influence you in some way?
Not directly. It's not directly related to my practice, but I am interested in the just kind of the virtuosic thing of having a body, and that definitely comes through in my work of just how incredible the things that we can accomplish with our body as a machine, basically. And so that relates back to this like digital analog flipping back and forth that I do with my work, like expressing this like digital experience but through purely analog or live performance, and seeing that in the body in Pilates of, you know, there's a lot of addressing imbalances and alignment and things like that, and you do become kind of like connected to the machine. It's called a reformer in Pilates, and so it's like kind of this weird, like playing an instrument where your body has to like really like connect to the tension of the springs and things like that. So that machine human thing is also kind of interesting.
Sorry, I'm just... Oh, not yet.
Is it him? No.
No. But let's go on with this, because like all three of you have very different attitudes when it comes to working. Like Melati and Donna, you were very much closer to this idea of the essence as opposed to constructing it as a full-out structure in some ways, or fixed alignment. So I was just wondering, because like you talked about essence, but you don't really separate between, you talk about the body wearing down as well, like in terms of performance, in terms of the body. And of course, like Donna and Xavier, you work with collaborators as well over an extensive period of time. So are there any forward-thinking that you would be planning for the works in future, or your collaborators? other than, in terms of trust, in terms of labor, in terms of...
Yes, I plan to, I'm committed to my core group of models and aging with them and seeing how things change over time. Hi.
I'm a bit outnumbered. Please carry on. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, that's the way that I plan to continue working with them over time. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I think my practice, of course, I would like to continue in a performance, like visual art-based performance art in the area, but also there's another spirit in terms of labor, like I'm getting now more and more into the to give more attention how to see, for example, what is the labor, artist as labor, like to be a dancer or to be a performance artist. What is your contribution for a change? Because like performance artists for a long time it was like only a history, but I think it was not responsible from the older performance artists if they say they don't carry on. They don't want to see there is a growth in the performance art, starting from what they have done in the past. So there is also like a kind of always in the very or in the age between how do you say, paid or unpaid, or what is the position of performance art? Is it only opening of an exhibition? So what is the what is behind this? What is the value as a work also? Because we cannot, of course, the spirit that time, it's not into the conventional way to appreciate art, but now, after 40 years, I think we need to look at this, to look at the how would you like appreciate a performance artist or a choreography or a theater director, an actor, dancer, collaborator, models, and this I think it's very important to see and to give like more attention, because otherwise it's always like. Now where everything is intertwining or merging, like dancers going to museum, choreography showing their work in the museum, or like the what is then the rule in there, or there should not be a rule, but what is the working ethic behind it? I think in Indonesia I would like to give more attention in that.
Sorry, Antony, we initially started out with where everybody trained from, their perspective as to like looking at the body, because all three of them have very different backgrounds themselves. So, and I was just wondering, and then we move on to the idea of stillness, and then into labor, the whole idea of bringing the body into the museum or into an art space itself. So part of the discussion here, I think Donna, Melati, and Xavier, they both have very vested commitment to their collaborators as well. And I guess like one of the questions would be like in regards to your work and in terms of like working with the sculptures.
Hello everybody, I'm very sorry that I'm late. I got stuck in the tunnel. If I'd had a bicycle, I would have been here on time. Anyway, I'm really delighted to come in when we're talking about the performative body, because I think that in many senses my work comes out of performance. So all of the things I do are a captured moment of lived time. And I don't actually use other other bodies in terms of translating performance as as the spectacle or the object of attention. But I think that the claim of my work is that each of these forms, whether they are boxes in body form and therefore empty, or the articulation of a human space in space, that it comes from the capturing of a lived moment. And the first of the slides in my little selection of slides is that moment of being captured, where I am, you could say, not a performer at all, but a still ground around which assistants make this register a mold. But I think for me, what that means is that there's a kind of bargain at work, or a wager, that because the work comes from, as it were, a lived and quite intense moment of concentration, stillness, and in a sense an acceptance of the body as an object which is nevertheless inhabited, that the residue of that can be imaginatively inhabited by others. And I suppose I'm quite interested in my fellow panelists' attitude to that, to the degree to which, in the way that each of you put the body into the frame, how much it is, as it were, the subject itself, or how much you want it to be the ground onto which the viewer projects.
Good question.
Yeah, sorry.
For me, I think it's clear that there is like there are different layers to call my work. Okay, the work is ready for the public. I think there is some lines where I don't want to go too much, but there is some lines that where to know first what is too much is, like, for example, like to put a narration on the work itself, too much narration on this, too much explanation, too much element that is used to explain about the presence of the body itself. So I try to, in my work, I try to reduce as much as possible the narrative itself. And of course, then it takes a risk that my action is very limited, but more using the technique of repetition through 4 hours, 5 hours, 12 hours, and several days, so that the presence itself, the presence of my body melted down gradually with the time, and it becomes something that is not just me. It's the space. It's with you. It's the object, and it creates a different, a new layers of energy or perceptions. So once it performed, then I think I also belong to the public, or the audience, or the space. So it's not that I want to control. Everybody has to feel like me. No. Yeah, something like that. Maybe Donna has a interesting way to answer.
What part of the question, or?
Ask me. How do you? I think the question here is like, the choice of projection into the body whenever you present your work within a certain space and context. Like,
I think the question, for me, the question is, are you using the body simply as an image? In other words, you're using a real body, but are you using it? I wonder, Donna, whether you aren't using the bodies in your pieces as in a way, a figure that is also part of a ground, and sometimes you're making the transition between one and the other, but they're in a sense, maybe I'm wrong because I don't know your work perhaps as well as I should, but that they are a continuation of landscape painting with a mythological scene, but the landscape occupies the body as much as the body occupies the landscape.
That's a great read. Yeah, I think it's not mythological at all because it's really physically real, and the presence is like penetrating the whole room. It's usually silent and still. The models are live textures that are disintegrating and becoming, like this piece I just did in Shanghai that opened on Saturday. We started with 1,000 kilos of wet clay, and the models were building their bodies over. They were painted, but then they were adding layers upon layers of clay to their body, becoming very heavy and still being very slow and glacial with their movements. So what I want to do is present this still experience, but also like a very intense personal experience that the models are going through. And becoming like another terrain, similar to like a topographical map that's becoming like sort of that conflates itself. Like the backdrop, is a painting, becomes the body, and then the body is not camouflage, but a living part of the painting, and it's a part that you can't own and you can't really capture. Like the essence is there for the people who are present in the room, and what remains are these documents of these photos, but essentially the people who are present in the room get a completely different experience than what a camera can capture. So I think it's important to accept that most people see things online, and what I'm trying to do is bring the body present. So when people are in that space, there's smell, there's a very uncomfortable energy, but it's not really theater. The performers are not begging for you to care about them. There's not like this kind of need, in a sense, which I sometimes relate to classical performance, in a sense, where there's like a beginning and an end. It's just sort of like you're experiencing something that you're not really supposed to be experiencing, which is a very private experience that the models are going through. So I think it's important, for me, it's important that it's all ephemeral and temporary, and then the paintings are created from that. That's the beginning image, which I scan the body and I take images of little crevices that I find are beautiful, and then from that I paint on top with pigments and clay and sort of take it to another like meta level of just layering.
Donna, tell us about the audience, though. I mean, if it is an audience, maybe it isn't an audience. Are they fixed, or are they allowed to, as it were, engage? Do they get into the picture, or is it like this? We are the spectacle; they are the passive consumers of maybe this slightly boring spectacle. No, I think the slides are great. I'm just wondering whether we're performing enough for you. But
yeah, essentially, I like to not really create a stage, like a divide. I want the audience to get close, but of course the fear is there because there's a live person. Well, they have gotten very close. It depends on the context, what city we're in, but essentially, I don't want there to be a divide, and because it's also a performance between what the audience, how the audience behaves, how they photograph, if they photograph, how close they get. You know, there's a lot of uncomfortable, like, I don't know, situations that can happen, and I like that. I like to not really put rules on the situation and try to control it, but rather like see what the audience
Have you
will do.
had to interfere at any point? Has somebody taken their penis out, for example? Has there been unacceptable engagement? Or is there such a thing as unacceptable engagement?
I mean, I personally don't see the models as being like overly sexualized. I mean, everyone is painted, there's like layers, but of course, there always is that pervert that will see a circle and identifying it as a nipple or like a line and see it as a part of genitalia. But it's not, it's sad, but it does happen. And I don't know what to really...
Have you had to intervene?
Well, security is a big part of my piece as well. So the security is like integrated into the work.
So people in black uniforms with weapons?
No, not at all. They're guards. They're always feminine, and they're powerful. And so there's a layer of, you know, because what I want the models to be comfortable, and that's my main priority, is to create a safe space for them.
Sorry, just to come back to the question about like treating their body as a landscape, because the tradition of the landscape itself is a sort of laden with a bit of, one would say, colonial insinuations within that, and in which that we treat the body, there is a kind of sense of universality that, would there be a sense of universality, or would you be considering the specifics of materials that you use during this moment?
And creation of the landscape, like.
Yeah, because like the creation of the landscape, one would talk about like the tradition of the landscape being something more of map making and place setting itself, but also like in which that you use the body, there is an understanding that this is the base material. You also speak of using clay, trying to create the sense of discomfort, but everybody's cultural interpretation of discomfort is very different as well.
Sure.
So I was just wondering if there was any like consideration towards the specificity of the context that you would work with that you would present your work, and how do you navigate through that?
So, for me, question?
It's just an open question.
I think there are different ways to treat the body as a landscape, as a word, as a sentence. You know, you also treat differently the landscape individually. You see landscape differently. You see landscape as part. You are part of the landscape, or you see landscape from the distance. It's also like to see how we see our body as a landscape. Do we see it in the distance, or are we part of this landscape? So for me, I deal both. So that how landscape is there, just there, not being created, but also how we create a new landscape with the landscape we are in. It's different terms of understanding distance, I think. So I think like in Donna's work is like if there is a distance, it's her decision to see to offer, like to offer or to invite the public to how to see the landscape also. But in my work, for example, where I use the installation of like space Raum concept, like the Raum installation, where public can enter and be part of the landscape, and like as close as possible to me sometimes. So,
what is the specificity of the language that you try to construct within such things? Like, how do you create this understanding? in different cultural contexts.
I don't understand your question. Sorry. Like
I think the beauty of the body and a landscape is that we all have one. So I think anyone who's looking at it can identify and empathize with that. So that's what I think, why it's such a core material that is essential that anybody can relate to. And that's why I think in that way it's, you know, I don't know if you necessarily have to explain it in that way personally. And also a landscape could be, you know, just like a surface of any planet or any different context, you know. And so when you mentioned context, I really think it's, you know, wherever I am, like I can present the same thing and people will still be able to relate to it. But I'm not sure if that answers it a bit.
We haven't heard from you.
Well, I was really interested in what you had said, Melati, about the distancing of being able to insert yourself within the landscape. Or so I think within some of my work, I definitely am pushing and pulling your ability to identify with your distance to the character, the performer that you're viewing, or the body. And sometimes it's extremely distant, and I'm purposefully removing any attachment that you can have to feelings of desire or empathy. So I thought that was an interesting way of seeing it.
I feel a bit lost, to be honest. But I mean, it's interesting. I guess I'm interested now to know what it is that has made us, in our different ways, return to the body. And I was very, I was thinking, as Donna was saying, well, we've all got one. Is absolutely, you know, that's the foundation of it. That in a sense, my feeling very strongly is that modernism, and I guess that's the story of the last 100 years in terms of the development of visual art, made somehow the body irrelevant, because the real challenge was how do you make autonomous works of art that are not about the service of power and the representation of hierarchy. And I set myself this problem of how do you bring back the body, but using in a way all the liberties that 100 years of fight to liberate the space of art into an open position of its own autonomy, but as the potential space of the generation of self-determination for the viewer. How do you do that? I think probably, you know, the thing that unites us is that we're all trying to do that. And I get the feeling that some of us are doing that politically in order to in some way question stereotypes and colonialism and territorialism of different ways. And yet I can't see, I think, maybe that's true of Melati, I think that, you know, Donna's work seems to me to be, in a sense, have a very strong relationship to the work of Helen Frankenthaler and abstract expressionism, and in a sense, you know, trying to inhabit that the liberties of pure color and in a way expression detached from representation, which, you know, I can see that, but I guess the real problem, particularly in the context of this art fair, is how is this consumed? How is it framed? How is it transmitted? And you know, if I think of Trisha Brown or I don't know, the early, maybe even Bruce Naumann's early body pieces. You either slip into the convention of choreography and dance, or into you get into a monitor. You present your work as a video. And would it be correct to say that well, certainly you two. I'm afraid, Javier, I don't have. This is your work. Yeah.
Yes.
How is this presented as photography?
No, that's a film work right there.
That's a film still.
Yeah, some of them are stills, and some of them are from live performances, documentation of live performances.
And they're basically presented in an art gallery, or.
Yeah, galleries, museums. Yeah, most of these are live performances. One of them was a kind of a theater piece.
Because I'm interested in the way that's one of the things that's happened, that the conventions in a sense have been broken, and we're having this extraordinary fight now about how much of visual art museums ought to be dark rooms. In other words, turning themselves into cinemas. And then how do you adapt to the performative? How do you adapt to I think the continuing wish of audiences to actually be involved. And Tino Segal, I don't know, are you aware of his work? I mean, the way that he manages to completely undermine the audience performer divide by implicating immediately the audience into the emerging kind of structure of a algorithmic series of negotiated relationships. And anyway, for me, I think certainly it's worthy of speaking about that. How do you? I mean, I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists how comfortable they are with the forms in which their work is, as it were, commodified or transferred or engaged with.
I think we can have one answer before we have to go to the questions soon, because we're really running a bit short. So if any of you would like to have a brief.
In the beginning of my study, I learned what is tableau vivant, for example, and what is how do you say, still life, and what is a live action. So there is a distinct, there's a difference between, for example, I would say Donna's work is based on tableau vivant, the history of tableau vivant, while mine is more most of my work is more into repetitive actions through times. So both are in the stillness of time. Both probably also deal with endurance, with images, of course, with images. But how we deal with this image and how the energy is transferred through, for example, colors. So the focus of Donna was probably the how do you say, archaic energy of the colors, while mine probably the immediate raw feeling or senses that interact with me when I was doing live, whereas her is represented into the digital as well as theatrical act. So there are different kinds, but I'm also interested how would Mr. Gormley transfer his body into the sculpture, which is like a frozen object that is in the form of a body. How do you transfer it into like iron and this certain pose, mostly stiff.
Yeah, they're getting less stiff. A bit less stiff. They're a little bit less stiff than they were. If you want to go and have a look at wiggly ones. Sorry, no innuendo intended.
Okay. Okay, we're down to the last 5 minutes, and I see that there's a lady who's very intent on having a question. 2 questions. So, if you don't mind.
One for Mr. Gormley and one for Donna. So for Mr. Gormley, the first time I saw your work was at a friend's collection in England, maybe 20 years ago, The Squatter. I thought it was so revolutionary, it was unbelievable. I was then lucky enough to see your work, your first installation in Beijing, with all those small clay figures.
In Tiananmen Square.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And today, seeing your visuals, I somehow, maybe because I live in Asia, I see an inspiration maybe from Chinese or Asian philosophy, and that's the question. Is there an inspiration for you in your work from having been exposed to the East?
Yeah, certainly. And I don't think I could be making what I'm making now had I not studied Vipassana meditation quite seriously over 2 years in India. But I think more broadly, I think the inspiration of the idea of the abstract body. In other words, the idea that maybe the whole of Western sculpture got it wrong, that actually it's really stupid to make a static, silent, still thing be a frozen frame in a narrative, that just doesn't work, because sculptures are still, silent, and in a way intensely boring. So how do you make that stillness and silence of sculpture mean something? Well, I think I learnt more from looking at the Jain figures in the temple at Mount Abu in Rajasthan than I did from looking at Bernini in the end. And yeah, I think India and indeed Taoist and Zen thought have been very important to me.
Thank you. And may I keep the microphone and ask to Donna, looking at your work and from the perspective of a woman, and from also all the key words you have given. You were the first one today to bring the word stillness. And other words you've said, it triggered in me the something that 1 woman out of 3 in this world goes through is abuse and violence. Is it something that is an underlying message or a condition that you're exploring through your work?
No, not directly, but for me it's more the presenting like a powerful stance, really, and not necessarily something related to violence. But I know that, yeah, like you said, 1 in 3 women go through that. But for me, I like to make things that are so ugly and difficult that they're beautiful. So I don't know if the violence comment comes from like the visual, but yeah, to me it's just really just painting really like gnarly, ugly things like that become beautiful. But, yeah.
Okay, I think we're down to the last 30 seconds, but maybe if anybody has like one last question or burning questions.
No burning questions.
No burning questions. Thank you all for being here today, and please thank the speakers and everybody else. Thank you.